There's a whole genre of Isekai where the hero doesn't fight. He gets summoned to a fantasy world, then does paperwork. He reforms the tax code. He builds roads. He argues with merchants about currency. It sounds like the least exciting wish anyone could imagine, yet in Japan it sells extremely well. Which is questioning, because this reads as an oddly specific fantasy. These characters don't desire to become powerful. They long to be listened to on their first day. Japan has a name for the thing they're dreaming their way out of. Nenko Joretsu, seniority ordering. Your rank, your salary, and your authority are set primarily by how many years you have been at the company, not by what you can actually do. It is one of the 3 pillars of the post-war employment system, and it isn't a vague cultural preference. It is how the pay scale is built. The part that stings isn't the money. Even between 2 people holding the same job title, the one who arrived first has more say in the room. Seniority isn't only a number on a pay slip. It decides whose opinion is allowed to count. And there's no way around it because of how people get in. Japanese firms hire new graduates in bulk every April. That cohort becomes your position. Hiring anyone mid-career was historically rare, used to plug gaps rather than to go after talent, which meant leaving one company almost never bought you a better place in the next one. The line you joined at 22 was mostly the one you stayed in. How a realistic hero rebuilt the kingdom opens with a young man being yanked out of Japan by a summoning spell. Kazuya Soima is a university student. He isn't a swordsman and arrives with no attack-based magic. He is studying to become a civil servant, the most rigidly seniority-bound career his country offers. The kingdom that summoned him is bankrupt. It was planning to hand him to a larger empire in place of war payments it couldn't make. Soima sits through the explanation, and then, instead of agreeing, he proposes a reform program: tax structure, food supply, debt consolidation. The argument he uses to save himself is his very civil service training. He spends 3 days learning the kingdom's finances, all after the king abdicates and makes him the 14th ruler of Elfrieden. 3 days. Back home, that same training would have bought him a desk and a decade of waiting. Here a country hands him the controls before the week is out. That's the wish. Not power. Permission. From Up on Poppy Hill is a Ghibli film set in Yokohama in 1963. Umi and Shun are high school students, and their clubhouse is coming down. It's an old building, packed with printing presses, chemistry equipment, and decades of accumulated student mess. The story gets set in motion when the school board votes to destroy the club building, despite the students' extensive renovations to restore it. So they get on a train to Tokyo and argue their case to the chairman himself. Nobody in that film is asking for power either. They're asking for the chance to be in the room where decisions are made, even though nothing in the system says they've earned it yet. That was 1963, after their parents' generation had been offered a deal. Nenko Joretsu came attached to something. Shushin Koyo, lifetime employment. You were hired straight out of school. You were paid less than you were worth for the first stretch of your career, and in exchange the company kept you until you retired. It was never a law. It was a promise, except being underpaid early for security later. And for one generation, it delivered spectacularly. In December 1960, Prime Minister Hayato Ikeda's cabinet approved a plan to double the national income within 10 years. Japan's own National Diet Library describes it as a deliberate shift of the country's attention away from political conflict and toward the economy, after a year of enormous protests over the security treaty with the United States. The cabinet slogan was tolerance and perseverance. The offer underneath it was blunter. Stop fighting about politics, and we will make you rich. The plan called for 7.2% growth a year. Actual growth came in above 10. The economy doubled in under 7 years. On October 1, 1964, the Tokaido Shinkansen opened between Tokyo and Osaka, 9 days before the Olympic Games arrived in the capital, timed so that the world would watch a country which had been rubble 20 years earlier move people at 200 kilometers an hour. It wasn't clean. The budget submitted to Parliament was deliberately understated. The real cost landed at nearly double, and both the railway president and the chief engineer resigned over the overruns before a single passenger boarded. But it opened, on schedule, and the loan Japan took from the World Bank to build it was paid back ahead of time. That time I got reincarnated as a slime begins with a man dying on a street in Tokyo. Satoru Mikami is 37. He left college, joined a large general contracting firm, and is still there 15 years later, which is the employment bargain written out as a biography. He is stabbed shielding a junior colleague from a robber. He wakes up as a slime. What he does with a fantasy world isn't conquer it. He organizes it. He settles goblins and wolves into a single village, negotiates a trade alliance with the Dwarven Kingdom, builds roads and industry and a currency. And eventually, the surrounding nations recognize the monster country he founded as a legitimate state. In the third season, at the festival held to mark that recognition, heads of state from across the region turn up to acknowledge what he built. A man who spent his entire working life inside one company died on a pavement and got a country. Here's what makes the fantasy urgent rather than just pleasant. The bargain has been canceled on one side. Japanese firms still hire in bulk every April. They still expect the commitment the old arrangement asked for. What they have quietly stopped supplying is the thing that made accepting it rational. Written this year, the East Asia Forum puts it plainly. Companies have kept what suits them, the bulk intake and the expectation of loyalty, and let the rest lapse. The structure is still standing. The promise inside it drained out from the employer's side alone. You can measure what that cost. Japanese labor productivity has finished last in the G7 every year since 1970, and one of the reasons given is underinvestment in people, which points straight back at the half of the deal that got abandoned. And you can see what it produced. Roughly 3 in 10 Japanese university graduates quit their first job within 3 years, a figure that has held steady for decades. What's new is the industry that has grown up around leaving. In April of this year, one resignation agency, a service you pay to quit on your behalf, was overwhelmed by new hires. Some of them called during the lunch break on day 1. Headhunted to Another World is about a man nobody was ever going to promote. Denisuke Ukamura is in his 30s, a middle manager at a large company, and he is good at his job. The show establishes that immediately. The trouble is the shape of his competence. He is easygoing, he fixes things, and he doesn't complain. So his employer's response to discovering he's talented is to keep shifting him around and handing him more work. They send him abroad on assignment, where his life in Japan ends. A demon lord summons him and offers him a job. Not a sword, and not a bloodline. A demon lord has looked at a human being with no magic whatsoever and spotted the thing his own company never bothered to appreciate. And the pitch includes the salary and benefits. Ukamura thinks it over and accepts. Which brings us to the turn, but not the one anybody wanted. The queue is finally moving. Between 2000 and 2022, Japan's working age population fell by more than 10 million people. Close to a third of the country is now over 65, and a labor market with nobody in it behaves nothing like one with a line out the door. Firms agreed to raise wages by an average of 5.25% in 2025, the biggest increase in more than 30 years. Companies that spent decades barely hiring anyone mid-career now bid against each other for experienced managers they never developed, while pushing graduates starting salaries up and cutting the people in between. Young Japanese workers are getting handed the thing they were told to wait for. Nobody decided it was fair. There just aren't enough left to make them wait, which is what these shows have been asking for the whole time. Soima builds a road network out of Roman-style concrete meant to last 2,000 years. Rimuru builds a nation and then throws a festival so the world will admit it exists. Neither of them is building a career. They're building something designed to outlive them in a country where the institution that promised to outlive you stopped. But it wasn't without a price. Soima didn't apply. He was taken, against his will, and he says so out loud in the first episode. Rimuru was stabbed to death on a pavement. Ukamura leaves while abroad. None of them can go home. That's the cost. Not a better job, not a faster promotion. A different world entirely, on the condition that the old one closes behind you for good. The wish isn't to be trusted sooner. It's to start again somewhere the clock hasn't already been set. Tuesday, something much smaller and much stranger. One vegetable. An entire country agreed to hate together.